Hello and welcome back to another episode of the ShefF1 Podcast off the back of a pretty impressive Miami Grand Prix weekend. We've got a brand new Formula One race winner, and you know what? Miami proved us all wrong and was, I wouldn't say a banger, but certainly the best of the three Miami Grand Prix we've had so far. I'm Rudy Brown, and joining me as always is Seb Alston and Amy Hammerslog, and we've got about an hour of F1 chats coming your way. We're going to be reacting to our predictions that we made at the start of the weekend. Some alright, some not so great. Certainly some room for improvement there. But of course we've got a lot to talk about because obviously this is another sprint race weekend, and of course Amy sort of doing somersaults in her front room.
Wakefield.
in Wakefield on the way back from the Otley Run after Lando Norris won his first race in F1. Spoiler alert in case you hadn't seen it already. But I think as that was sort of the main talking point coming away from the weekend, let's talk about it. Lando Norris' first race win. Amy, it was a long time coming.
Yeah.
What did you make of his drive in the end?
Oh, it's incredible. I was just saying then, I actually do believe he could have won without the safety car, and I'm so glad it's come in a race where, Max Verstappen didn't have to DNF. He has gone and won on his own ability there. Obviously, look, he had that from the safety car, but that's what racing is, sometimes a bit of luck, and it came his way, and he just completely went and won the race by 8 seconds. He was just so fast, and yeah, I'm just so happy it's finally come, especially, messing up in the sprint, missing out on sprint pole this week, crashing in the sprint race. I was like, oh my God, another doom Miami for Lando Norris. And then starting 5th on the grid didn't look like maybe a podium. And then them upgrades really came in. And even Oscar, who didn't have the full set, I just think what a weekend it was for McLaren, considering Lando Norris got DNF'd in the sprint race, so it was still such a good week.
Yeah, definitely a notable weekend of improvement for McLaren. Not that they needed it per se, but Oscar Piastri's pace, particularly on Sunday, was mightily impressive. And after a bit of a sort of unfortunate tangle with Carlos Sainz, Seb, Piastri sort of, had to sort of take a back seat and sort of, while Norris was winning, it should have been a top 4 finish for Piastri, I think. But what did you make of that incident down in the braking zone with Carlos Sainz?
I think it was a hard one to say it's entirely on Sainz. I think he was to blame. I don't know whether or not I agree that he, should have picked up a penalty for it, but I do think he was to blame. I do think Oscar was really unfortunate. He was just unfortunate in the whole race. Not only that incident, obviously the safety car and the VSC came at the wrong time for him. He had really good pace, got up to P2, was running in P2. I think in a normal, scenario, maybe he could have held on to that P2. He looked quicker than Charles in the Ferrari, and he was holding his own, obviously without the upgrades as well, which apparently was like 2 tenths a lap. He did incredibly well. Yeah, I mean, it was just still, though, an incredible weekend. I'm sure he'll be happy for his teammate to get, come alongside him and both have wins now. So, yeah, I mean, I can't say I'm a huge Lando fan, but even I saw, when he was seeing how much it meant to him, I was like, okay, it's quite nice. I was hoping Verstappen was going to hunt him down. The one time I want Verstappen to actually go and win a race, he didn't win a race, but I think he was also had some floor damage. Apparently, that's why he was quite slow, but it was his own fault they had the floor damage because he ran into that boulevard or whatever the hell they called it.
Regardless of Verstappen's damage, though, it was an exceptional drive from Norris. Once he was out in front, nobody caught him, and the racecraft, no mistakes crept in like we've seen in previous years. Take Sochi, for example. That was the big one that commentators were referring to throughout his sort of lead out front. And the only sort of dampener on it really was the whole Donald Trump involvement with it, really.
That was poor.
It was a bit of a controversial one. I mean, Crofty brought it up as he was crossing the line, and I was just thinking to myself, if I've sacrificed my entire life to be an F1 race winner, and the sort of the moment is tainted as I cross the line for my first checkered flag, leading the pack, and they make a Donald Trump play on words.
Yeah, it was poor from Crofty because he's come up with some great, he wins in Spa, he won in Spa, he wins in Monza.
Yeah.
Like, he is one of the best sports commentators I've ever heard, and I was so excited to be able to have that commentary. And when Lando's landed, that was good, but he originally said Lando trumps Verstappen, and I was like, what? It's unnecessary.
For those of you unfamiliar, by the way, Donald Trump was in the McLaren garage this weekend. It wasn't just a random Donald Trump reference, but despite many doubts that he would appear, unfortunately Donald Trump was in attendance in Miami, and he was one of the first people to congratulate Lando once he got out the car as well, which I mean, again, you've been slogging behind the wheel for an hour and 40 minutes, and one of the first people to congratulate you, wish you well done, was Donald Trump. I mean, then again, I'd still feel as though my time was wasted.
To be fair, could be a Trump fan.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was no there was no harsh comments after the race. I did see an interview taken from Lando on Twitter saying, "Oh yeah, you know, someone of his stature." Oh man, he tried to even claim. Donald Trump even tried to say that, "Oh, I was his lucky charm." I mean, come on. Anyway, enough about.
I'll see him in Imola. Hopefully,
Donald Trump.
Yeah, hopefully Lando gets winning race.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah, for Lando Norris, maybe the more Donald Trump, the better, but hopefully not. But we'll move away from off-track politics now and talk back on F1. As I said before, Miami was a sprint race weekend, and we had a pretty decent sprint race to open things up. I think a notable thing, and I'm just going to name him already. Kevin Magnussen, for me, is my driver of the season. That man has been a goldmine for entertainment and just historic battles for no reason, apart from the fact that, I love what Haas are doing at the moment. We saw it in Saudi Arabia where Kevin Magnussen was just the cork in Hülkenberg's points bottle, ensuring that no other quick cars could get past him, being as wide as possible, stopping Hamilton, stopping Tsunoda, literally just going to any lengths necessary, including picking up a 10-second time penalty for cutting the chicane before the back straight. I mean, Seb, you're sort of a bit on the fence about how Haas have been doing things in terms of Magnussen just being this sort of nutty driver, sort of in the midfield, stopping anyone from getting near Hülkenberg. Have you sort of, maybe changed your opinion a bit? Do you like how they sort of, strategize things now?
I mean, I can understand it, obviously, and I do think it's obviously the right play to go through. But, I mean, I said it last time when he did it. I can't remember where it was.
It was Saudi Arabia, I think, yeah.
It is basically cheating.
Not really.
Cutting the chicane to it's like going on like F1 on F1 23 and going on like just Monaco and just cutting the chicane and you overtake someone
Yeah, but he got a penalty for it though.
He
did.
And
he served the penalty, no questions asked. It was all very fair.
It doesn't just affect him though; it affects other drivers.
But that's the point. If he's defending his teammates, he's his teammate. They're working as part of a team so they can score points as a collective.
When's the point it comes unsafe?
Yeah, exactly.
As well?
Like, what if you crash into someone else?
As well.
Or you have, as I've mentioned before, Crashgate.
Yes,
people say that's completely wrong, and I don't think this is obviously not on the same scale, but it's going down a slippery slope. But I will say, we did mention about obviously Hülkenberg leaving to Sauber. Maybe he'll be less likely to do these things. He did seem unhappy about having to do it this weekend. In Saudi Arabia, he was like, we're just happy for the team. This weekend, he was a bit like, I'm not happy with the way we have to do it, but I'll do it, but I'm not happy doing it. And he was actually also blaming Hülkenberg for getting out of his DRS range.
Yeah.
So obviously maybe he wouldn't have had to cut the chicane if he actually had DRS to defend Hamilton. So yeah, I'm still unsure about it, but he did well.
It was defensive for sure. That is one word for it. Maybe too defensive, but it was for a long time until, obviously being way too aggressive, I think, with Lewis Hamilton. He did really well to make sure that he didn't overtake him, but he kind of just let himself down. And, he might end up with a race ban.
That's very true.
How many penalties he got this weekend?
10 penalty points now.
Yeah, it's moved on from Esteban Ocon being sort of Mr. Penalty to back to Kevin Magnussen.
10-second penalties for him as well. Yeah. 3 in the sprint race alone, which is incredible.
I know. It's quite impressive at that point, really. The fact that he didn't get disqualified either. I mean, I get what you're saying. It can sort of wander into the realms of dangerousness, and I do fully appreciate that, and that is, obviously not what we want to have. But for now, I'm loving it. I think it's so entertaining in the midfield, fighting for scraps, basically. Even you look back to China last week, him and Lance Stroll battling so they didn't finish in last place, or weren't driving in last place anyway. No, Kevin Magnussen has been, I think, wonderful for me in terms of my entertainment for F1 this season.
A bit like Joey Barton, I'd say.
Yeah, the enforcer, as it was. But no, I mean, we'll talk about Hülkenberg as well, because he has been, again, just really, really consistent behind the wheel of that Haas car, which is so much better than everyone thought it would be at the start of the season. More points for Hülkenberg this weekend, picked up in the sprint race. I mean, Amy, how impressed have you been with Hülkenberg this season?
Well, I think I'm a bit of Nico Hülkenberg's hater last year, but this year, he's been so impressive, and he's just proven once again that he is the driver out of the two who should be getting that move to, Sauber, which will eventually be Audi.
I mean, I think he'll still hold his head high coming away from Miami and going into Imola. I think there are more good things to come for Haas, especially if they keep doing this sort of once one driver's in the point, the other one drives like a madman type strategy.
I mean, out of 2 drivers for me who are constantly, I see them in Q3 and it's just a normality now, one is Yuki Tsunoda and the other is Nico Hulkenberg,
Yeah.
and you wouldn't have thought that last season, especially a Haas car getting into Q3 from, like more often than not. So yeah,
He did it quite a lot last season as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it was impressive the amount of times he did it last season. But Yuki Tsunoda, I think, is another one who this weekend, other than the sprint qualifying, had an absolutely exceptional
Yeah,
weekend.
Flawless. Drove
Arguably
so
my
well.
driver of the weekend. I
Wow.
think obviously you got Norris, but in terms of basically every session apart from sprint qualifying, he was arguably driver of the day in each session. I mean, getting
thanks, Sav.
we'll get onto predictions later, but in the sprint, obviously making his way from P15, I think it was, to P8 to score a point.
Yeah,
I mean,
crazy.
that's incredible. And then obviously in the race, P7. I mean, yeah, he like Norris, he got lucky with the safety car, but still, I mean, in an RB, in a season where we were saying how difficult it's going to be to score any points, let alone getting actually a decent amount of points with the top 5 teams, seemingly being so far away from the others. But I think that also leads on to Aston Martin.
Yeah.
A stinker of a weekend for them,
Yeah,
I've got to say.
yeah.
They are just falling back into the midfield pack. I thought, we thought this season, especially with Alonso signing a new contract, maybe he knew that the team were going to start to kick on, but I mean, it's worrying. I mean, they just didn't have the pace at all. They were battling with Alpines.
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, that is absolutely
That's poor.
shocking. From where they were at the start of last season, the step they made, every upgrade they've seemingly brought, I mean, it's been a downgrade. They have, I don't know what's going on there. So
I mean, I did certainly anticipate. I think you might both have done as well. But this Aston Martin sort of not drop off, but they weren't going to take anywhere near as big a step forward as they did last year.
Yeah.
If anything, it would be a step back, considering other teams' development around them. They have been very lucky in that Alpine have now, of course, excluding their points this weekend, Alpine have been terrible. Mercedes have been terrible. But that doesn't mean Aston Martin have been particularly good. I mean, okay, a double SQ3. For in this weekend, and then P9 for Fernando Alonso. If this was this time last year, the SQ3, double 2 cars in SQ3, that's to be expected.
Exactly.
And then Alonso P9, he finished P3 there last year. I mean, I know it's very sort of pedantic in sort of comparing it directly with last year, but no, it's not where Aston Martin want to be at all. It's not where Fernando Alonso wants to be at all. And if we've learned anything by now in this year of Formula One, contracts mean naff all. And Fernando Alonso is someone that I think has that sort of that sort of royal status to just go wherever he likes, no matter what sort of contracts have been put in place. There is that Mercedes seat still up for grabs, but I don't think he'll move. But I am sort of being hypothetical. If Aston Martin don't make these steps forward, it could be a sort of mid-season move next year, which sees Fernando jump ship, especially if their 2026 package doesn't look too great. He could even retire as well, because we're saying all this forgetting that man is almost eligible for a free bus pass. No offense, Fernando, but let's talk about Alpine. Seb, you brought Alpine up, first points of the weekend. You must have been elated, although maybe a little bit sort of reserved, considering it wasn't the Gaz man in P10.
He's gutted. He had such a good race as well. I mean, his first lap. This is Gasly, by the way. I mean, he dropped back 3 positions, had a pretty terrible start. Got obviously pushed off by Ocon. We won't talk about that. But then he made his way back through some amazing overtakes on Ocon and Alonso, and then his pace was really good. He was the lead car, so he got given the optimal strategy. Pitted early, was closing the gap to the likes of Tsunoda.
Yeah.
If without the VSC, he was net P8 essentially. The VSC and the safety car, and he's in 12th, and he's on L tyres now, and he can't battle. So
yeah,
it was really disappointing because it was the first weekend he's really been quite a bit quicker than Ocon, and then Ocon goes and scores a point. And I've got to say, Ocon on his second stint was really quick.
Yes,
actually, I can't say that Ocon had a bad weekend. He had a really good weekend. Actually, in the race, he recovered really well. Obviously, got lucky with the VSC, but it's racing. That's going to happen. So, Alpine though, they're making steps forward. I didn't expect them to be this competitive this early. I mean, they're still not where they want to be, and they're still worse than they were last year. But I think it's they've brought upgrades, and the upgrades actually work. I mean, they couldn't have got worse, but they're ahead of the likes of Sauber already. Yeah,
and I'd say Williams as well. They've definitely got a better package than Williams right now. And, another team that have had another disappointing season. But, Alpine, finally we're seeing some progress being made. And like you said, this was Pierre Gasly's first properly impressive weekend on pace-wise. Ocon has certainly had the upper hand throughout the sort of beginning phase of the season. Of course, he's also been getting the upgrades before Gasly has as well. Look back to China last time out, and it was Ocon with the supposedly faster car than Gasly. But they've a big step forward for Alpine, and it was very much needed as well. I think it was a long time coming. But no, we'll talk about the teams that they're quicker than as well, because Sauber, another I forgot about them. There is quite literally nothing to say.
Why did Bottas get driver vote for Sauber?
I still have no idea.
I'm a little bit confused.
No,
it was something like 12% of the vote or something like that as well. I mean, if it wasn't Lando out front winning, if it was Max out front winning, it would have been Bottas that won driver of the day.
Crazy.
For those of you unaware, for some reason, when the driver of the day graphic came up on our TV screens when we were watching the race, Lando Norris was out front with like 40% of the vote or something ridiculous like that, which was justified, of course, as he was leading and then went on to win the race. For some reason, Valtteri Bottas was the second most popular driver in the vote, even though it was a sort of it was
P16.
Yeah, a race finish that just sort of falls into obscurity, one that the team just won't care about by the end of the season, or even by now, I don't think, anyway. There is quite literally nothing to say. They had no TV time. I think there may have been one okay pit stop, which is a step forward, I suppose. Considering they've been averaging about 10 seconds per stop this season. But then Williams as well, another team that I think Alpine certainly are climbing ahead of in the performance rankings. Logan Sargent, P10 in the sprint, exactly what he needed, of course, with penalties applied to Hamilton and Magnussen afterwards. But still, P12, much better than where he really should have finished. And that was in the sprint, though. And then, of course, he's hangled with Magnussen in the race. Magnussen was able to continue. Magnussen blamed for the incident. And then, another one of those Logan Sargent weekends with absolutely no luck where it mattered most. Amy, is Logan Sargent on thin ice, especially considering, Kimi Antonelli's knocking on the door, Williams are starting to get a little bit tired of him, maybe money isn't too much of an issue anymore. What is the deal with Logan Sargent? Is he safe?
No, I mean, that's pretty clear. I want him to be safe. I want him to have his seat much longer than he is being, rumoured to. But even like James Vowles did an interview and he was talking about how they want to make the car faster for Alex.
Yeah.
And didn't mention Logan's name. So for me, that was a bit dodgy. And again, it's a team that I've really enjoyed seeing since James Vowles has come in, because he's been so well spoken, especially about both drivers. And so far this season, giving up Logan's own car after Alex made a mistake and giving it to Alex, that was harsh, but I kind of got my head around it. Now how he's speaking about him, I don't want to criticise James Vowles, but he's making it more than obvious that he has not got long left. I think we will see him in Imola. He did say that. James Vowles was like, Logan's not going, this isn't his last race, but he never denied that, he might be here at the end of the season. And I feel like he should be doing that. I think, Logan Sargent, there is a driver there. I always say this, and it may sound harsh and a bit stupid.
Rookie of the year in his one and only F2 season.
Well,
it was a strong showing from him, especially with such a competitive grid.
Yeah.
But I mean, that Williams does look pretty tough to drive. Last season, okay, maybe there were some races where he should have and could have done a lot better. And this season, again, he hasn't looked particularly quick for the most part, but he has been shelved. He is without a doubt not even the second driver. There might as well be three made up drivers, and he's like the fifth driver. That's the treatment he's getting here. And look, we say that all these decisions James Vowles are making, we can disagree with them all we want. Should we be surprised? I mean, this is the man that birthed the Valtteri It's James radio line. He was ruthless with his driver treatment at Mercedes. He's continued that with Williams. And you look at the success he had with Mercedes. If it ain't broken, don't fix it, in terms of a method of dealing with your drivers, and, especially if one's not performing up to scratch. Of course, the FIA have received a request recently made by Kimi Antonelli and co. and Mercedes, whatever, for his super license to be granted. Of course, he still isn't 18 yet, so there is some sort of loophole that they'll need to find in order for him to, be eligible for an F1 seat partway through this season. I mean, it would be pretty cool to see him in that seat, but I saw Will Buxton on a podcast recently saying Mercedes are keen to snap him up straight away, basically. That seat is open. They don't want him to, acclimatise to life in a different team just for him to move to Mercedes next year. They clearly rate him very highly. He said, and I quote sort of directly, that Behrman was the litmus test. You can chuck a kid in the F1 car, and he was absolutely fine. He was, in fact, he was excellent in that Ferrari in Saudi Arabia. And so Antonelli, it looks like maybe a safe bet to having that Mercedes. And so that obviously means that Williams are also going to be keen to have him behind the wheel if Toto Wolff rates him so highly. Sorry, I saw you cut you off a bit there. What were you going to say?
I just don't think. Fair enough if Alex Albon was doing what he was doing last season, but he's not.
No, you're right.
He had a really poor weekend.
He did have a poor weekend, and fair enough if there's a big comparison between the two, like there was last season, and if they got rid of Logan Sargent at the end of last season, maybe I would have got it a bit more. But compared to what Alex has done, Alex has been the driver making all the mistakes. He's the one who's causing Williams to spend all this money on new parts and car, and the got the exact same points, 0. So yeah, for me, I think it's quite harsh comparing them, especially this early on in the season, because if there was a car there and Alex was getting points week in, week out, you've got to say Logan's not doing a job. But when they're both on exactly 0 points, there very clearly is not a car there, and I think it's harsh to blame everything on a driver when the other one is doing the exact same, if not worse, mistakes. So yeah, it's really harsh in my opinion.
No, you're absolutely right. That is one thing that has been a bit different about Albon this season. Just no points so far, and for no real reason other than there hasn't been really any opportunity to do so. The car hasn't been up to scratch. Okay, it sort of lost that magic in the straight line that that has been the reason for its points in the past. Take sort of Belgium 2022 that springs to mind, for example. Where it was ridiculously quick down the Kemmel Straight, and then Albon was able to make the car as wide as possible, but he hasn't really been. He's just simply not been in the position to score points. Whether that's down to the car, whether that's down to his mistakes, it's been a definite blend of the two. And strategy hasn't quite been as inventive as it was maybe last year, or was it the year before, where he did that sort of 50-odd lap tyre strategy. And they've not really had the opportunity to sort of emulate any of their previous wonder strokes down at Williams. But we'll move away from them. I think one driver we need to talk about in a little bit of detail is Lewis Hamilton. Now, we have been rather critical of him this season on the podcast, but I've got to say this weekend was probably his best yet. I think particularly in Sunday's race, he was really, really impressive in just making really quite ambitious moves stick. That battle he had with Hülkenberg, where he was sort of left no room and then still found a way to chuck it up the inside, force Hülkenberg out wide but still on track. And I think it was definitely a step forward in the right direction for Hamilton. Seb, what did you make of his performance this weekend?
I thought obviously overall the weekend's not amazing, but the Sunday was definitely a step forward. I think that you look at the time difference between him and Russell, and bearing in mind there was a safety car, he was 18 seconds clear of him by the end, and they're in the same car. I think Lewis, obviously, I think we've seen it last year and maybe the year before. It took him some time, he was testing out different setups and things like that, and maybe now he's a bit more settled, and he said it in qualifying, I didn't mess around with things, this is just the pace we've got now. So maybe now he's a bit more settled, he'll start to come into his own a bit more. I mean, he still seemed, the Lewis Hamilton we've seen the past few races in terms of the press conference, that was something we criticised, maybe, he seemed a bit too light-hearted and things like that. Still seemed like that, but he was just a bit more on it this weekend. So promising signs for him, and obviously promising signs for Ferrari, of course. And to set the grid for Sunday's race, I mean, he was only a 10th off George Russell, who has been, his track record around Miami has been better than Lewis Hamilton's in the short time that F1 has raced there. So yeah, certainly a step forward for Lewis Hamilton this weekend, and delivered some fantastic entertainment in the sprint as well, with that sort of crazy battle with Kevin Magnussen and Yuki Tsunoda. Failed to break through there, but it was a sign of things to come on Sunday. But that time he was successful in delivering the result that he needed, scoring some decent points. Definitely a bit of a boost to his confidence. And race pace looking really strong. Maybe around one lap there is still room for improvement, but who am I to tell Lewis Hamilton what to do and what to improve on? But we'll move away from him now. Let's talk about Ferrari. Not really much to say. It was fine. I mean, Carlos Sainz, I think it was probably his worst weekend yet in terms of, how he was on track. That incident with Piastri, I do think that 5 seconds was warranted. I think that was a reasonable sort of decision made by the stewards. Look, he was moaning and crying to his engineers. Piastri did this. He went wide and he's getting he's this, that, and the other. He was moaning lap after lap after lap instead of concentrating on making the move on him to get past him properly. Oh, he needs to give up the position. And then McLaren and the
stewards both agreed and say, no, he doesn't. And so when he did go to make the move in the braking zone just before the final corner, he overcooked it. Locked up the brakes, bashed into Piastri's front wing when Piastri was just beginning to turn in because, he obviously couldn't wait any later, otherwise the corner would end. And, I think, the damage that's Piastri's car sustained as well, and where he could have finished in comparison to where he did end up, finishing, it was, What did you make of? Let's talk about Charles' teammate, Amy. What did you think about Charles this weekend?
I mean, for me, it was quite nice to see, Charles in a better position than Carlos for once this season. I mean, Carlos has dominated for so long, and to see Charles actually fight for pole position and then in the race, being involved with the Red Bulls, finishing above our Red Bull, it was nice to see him back there. And Carlos Sainz, for me, I love Carlos Sainz. He's a great driver, but I am with you, Rudy. I think it was definitely warranted, that penalty. I don't know, I've always thought it, the last 2 seasons, that there's always a little bit of fighting between Piastri and Sainz on track. I don't know if it's because they're the second driver in their teams, I don't know, or, Carlos Sainz is jealous of him and Lando. But I always see it, and I thought it was weird to see it again, because Oscar Piastri is a very unbothered driver, but he just wanted to race, and it was a bit, I thought he was gonna, once Carlos made the move, Piastri came straight back at him on that straight with the DRS. Yeah.
There was that sort of burst of pace that he did have until the damage really started to present itself. It was an end plate that came off for Piastri, and then it was a double pass from I think Hamilton and Hulkenberg or something like that, who both got past him with reasonable ease. But yeah, it was unfortunate for Piastri. We spoke about it earlier. His pace was really strong this weekend, and it should have been a top 4 finish for him, but sadly not. Now, before we react to our predictions that we made at the start of the weekend, I don't seem to think we really gave Daniel Ricciardo enough credit at the start of this episode for the P4 finish in sprint qualifying, and of course the sprint race as well. But then it wasn't meant to be for the rest of the weekend. After an exceptional showing on Friday and Saturday, Daniel was nowhere to be seen on Sunday, or even in the qualifying session either. I mean, Seb, it was an immediate fall from grace for Ricciardo. A great, weekend in Shanghai pace-wise before that incident with Lance Stroll, and then of course, continuing his good form into sprint qualifying in the sprint race. What went wrong?
I think it was the sort of thing we saw quite a lot of the drivers, especially sort of Lando in SQ3. It's just unpredictable how the tyres are going to react and whether they're going to heat up or not. We saw it with Lando in that one lap. He just wasn't able to do it in sprint qualifying. Yeah, and then in the actual qualifying for Ricciardo, the one lap that matters in Q1, he just doesn't light it up, and he was struggling all over the place. So it's unlucky, because you think if he was able to, he probably, he showed he had the pace around the circuit to, obviously not start 4th probably, but he could have maybe, compete with the likes of Tsunoda to get into Q3. So I think it's unlucky, but then also, you can't put that down to driver error as well. But yeah, I think the sprint does show that he's still in there. It is within him. He still has that talent. And
because not only was it good pace-wise, he held off Carlos Sainz exceptionally well, right to the line as well. Great entertainment, great driving from Ricciardo. That fire in his belly that we haven't properly seen since his Renault days is back. And then It just disappeared. It vanished. The pace was gone, and then there was nothing really to show for it. There was no recovery drive made, unlike his teammate Tsunoda in the sprint race. And it was just sort of back to square one this season for Ricciardo, which is dreadfully unfortunate, considering there is pace still in him, and we want to see that come out more often. Of course, there is a bit of bias there, considering how likeable he is as a person and how many fans he's got, and people want to see Daniel do well. But of course, it is the better performing driver in Red Bull sister team that goes on to get their main seat. But as you say, with the sprint being unpredictable, I think there has been this sort of trend that the pace that we see in the sprint race and the results that we see in the sprint race can tell us absolutely nothing about what we're going to see on the Sunday/Saturday, considering, depending on what part of the year the sprint race was. But let's react to our predictions now. So for those of you new round here, we make predictions at the start of each season, at the start of each race weekend, with select categories earning points for each category. We've got we've got a bit of an idea as to what we're going to do for whoever finishes the season with the most points on our leaderboard. Seb and I were discussing things, once we start to earn a little bit of money from the podcast, we might try and sort something out for a fun video at the end of the season. But so far, Amy leads with 29 points before we tot up the points from this weekend's Miami Grand Prix. I'm on 23 and Seb is sadly down in with 16 in last place. But it's still all to play for. There's still plenty of rounds left. It's a long F1 season, so you're still definitely in the fight, Seb. But let's start off with who we predicted to finish on sprint pole. Seb and I both got it correct with Max Verstappen. Amy, you jumped the gun a bit with Lando Norris's success and said he'd finish on sprint pole, not to be for Lando Norris on the Friday or Saturday? Friday.
Yeah. I just thought, as well, SQ1 and SQ2. Oh my God, when he had the fastest lap until Charles Leclerc went and set it in Q3 on the next day.
Yeah.
And that was on mediums, so I was like, oh my God, it's just going to come alive in SQ3. And yeah, it weren't meant to be 8th or 9th he was, ended up being.
And then, that obviously resulted in him being in the sort of a midfield battle going into turn 1, and a tangle saw him finish without points after he was sort of shoved off track. A little bit of a 4-1 doesn't go. I think the Mercedes had no room, neither Aston Martin had any room, and Norris was just, again, the one that sort of suffered the most from it, apart from maybe Fernando Alonso, who drops from like 8th to 18th or something crazy like that. But a point each for me and Seb for predicting Max Verstappen correctly. And then now moving on to the sprint podium, again, Seb and I said Max the win. Amy, you thought Lando would convert his hypothetical sprint pole. Yeah, wrong race. But yeah,
I said he was going to win something this weekend. You can go check out the video. I'm not a liar. I mean, I do say this most weekends as well. It's either him or Charles. Well, yeah, they're going to win it. And most weeks it's wrong, but this one week it was, and I went for the wrong race. But it's fine. He still won a Grand Prix. So.
The less said about each of our podiums, the better, though, for the sprint. Apart from you, Amy, you did correctly predict Sergio Perez to finish P3. Seb and I thought he'd do a little bit better and finish just behind his teammate Max. And then I said Alonso to finish P3 in the sprint. I mean, he looked really punchy in China. That Aston Martin hasn't been too bad around Miami in the past. It was set up to be a decent weekend for Alonso, and then no, the car just simply didn't deliver, and neither did he. To be fair, I think he was out qualified by Stroll in the sprint qualifying session, and that just sort of set the tone for the rest of the weekend. Pretty sort of subpar for the Spaniard, but 1 point for Amy for getting Perez correct in third place on the sprint podium. Now moving away from the sprint onto pole position for Sunday's race, and it was points across the board for each of us, all saying Max Verstappen, despite Lando Norris's strong showing in the sprint qualifying right up until SQ3. It was Max that got the job done on Saturday, but just because he finished on pole position doesn't mean he was our star of qualifying necessarily. This could be anyone that puts in a decent performance in the midfield, and none of us really got it right.
No, I don't think anyone gets a point for this.
I mean, we usually sort of give it to whoever did the best out of the three drivers that we've selected. I said Valtteri Bottas. I can't even remember where he finished. I don't. Was it Q2? No, I think he just missed on Q2. Then he was P16. Am I making that up, or is that where he finished? I'm probably just making that up.
He was 16th.
Yeah, P16. All right, memory's much better than I thought it was. Amy, you said Logan Sargent not meant to be, despite his P10 in the sprint.
It wasn't too bad in qualifying.
And then obviously still went down. But when he got to put himself in P12 with obviously 10 seconds left of it to go, I was like, could he hold on? Could he get into Q2? I said, a good week quali for Slogan isn't getting into Q3. It's
you
getting
just called him Slogan, was that?
No, but that maybe could be a new name. Slogan. But I thought he might get high up in Q2, but weren't meant to be, sadly.
And then Seb, you said Lando Norris. I mean,
he
to be fair,
wrong,
he's out of the three. He's probably the best one.
He should have done better.
Outperformed his teammate.
Yeah,
with the upgrades as well, though, compared to Piastri, you think he probably should have had a bigger gap. Yeah, I don't think fifth.
You deserve the point out of all three, but
I don't think anyone does.
I mean, we always sort of use the term star very loosely. So I think Seb, give yourself the point for that. Why not? It was.
You need it.
He was the only one that had a by some sort of standard a good qualifying session. Not one for Bottas to remember. Logan Sargent, again, the less said the better. Lando Norris, respectable. Anyway, moving on to the flop of qualifying now. So I think this one, there is a little bit of room for debate here, except maybe not, actually. Amy, you said Daniel Ricciardo, and I think we have to agree in saying that he was the flop in qualifying, just after an amazing performance in the sprint race, and he fell short of getting into Q2, P18. What on earth happened there? I mean, where did the pace go? And then in terms of who Amy and I said George Russell. That's about it. That's all I can say, really. And then Esteban Ocon for yourself, Seb. I think Ricciardo is the only one that is really, a flop by sort of dictionary definition. So, Amy, you do get the point for that one. Now, if you want to click off the video right now after seeing who we've predicted for the podium, I mean, none of us got it correct. We've had an absolute howler for our podium in Sunday's race. We all said Max Verstappen to win. Amy and Seb both said Norris P2. I said Perez P2 and Norris P3. And then it was the same podium, just mixed around, and none of us were correct with any of them, which is deeply frustrating, considering it was close but no cigar with 1 and 2 for you both. But yeah, I think the less said about that, the better. Just Lando Norris won. None of us was going to predict that unless it was the sprint race. And
and I did.
and I think we should move swiftly on. Now, time for driver of the day. I'm going to just say Daniel Ricciardo, get it out of the way. I'm sorry. I fell into the hype train. I was hit by it as well. And he obviously wasn't the driver of the day for Sunday. Seb, you said Piastri, which, to be fair, wouldn't have been a bad shout. His result definitely wasn't reflective of his race weekend. But there is no argument to say here that Amy's prediction of Yuki Tsunoda is by far the best one for driver of the day. Tsunoda's pace was just exceptional. And not only that, but once he was in battles, I mean, his racecraft has improved so much. I mean, his defensive driving is something that he's always been really, really good at, and his overtaking as well. His braking style is so unique, and it's really refreshing to see someone quite punchy in the midfield, and he's been able to master it without making anywhere near as many mistakes as he used to. He's a little bit calmer behind the wheel as well now. That maturing that Yuki Tsunoda needed at the start of his F1 career is finally coming into tuition. But yeah, Yuki Tsunoda comfortably driver of the day. Anyone got any disagreement there?
Absolutely not.
No, I'm
Sweet.
alright.
Lovely stuff. Now, enough about praising the drivers in Sunday's race. Let's berate them a little bit. So, Amy, you said George Russell to be your flop of the race. Seb, you said Carlos Sainz, and I said Lewis Hamilton. I think we can eliminate Lewis Hamilton from this decision because it was a solid Sunday for him. Decent racecraft in terms of, no mistakes crept in and some lovely overtakes, especially in that battle with Hülkenberg towards the start of the race, and just solid pace throughout to pick up a very respectable P6 in the end for him. So yeah, my prediction of Hamilton is out the window. So it is between George Russell, predicted by Amy, and Carlos Sainz, predicted by Seb. George Russell, much slower than Hamilton, who has been pretty poor this season, out-qualified him as well. So could you have expected better from Russell? Probably. Yeah. There's not really much to say about his Sunday because, again, he was another driver that didn't really receive enough or any sort of media and TV coverage. So there isn't really much to say about him. And then Carlos Sainz, much slower than his teammates, slower than both the Red Bulls, slower than both the McLarens, and yet he sort of got into that tangle with Oscar Piastri, which cost him 5 seconds in the race, finishing behind Sergio Perez in the grand scheme of things once that penalty was applied. I think I'm going to say Carlos Sainz for that. Any disagree?
Okay. Yeah, I'll take that.
I think it's George Russell.
Explain.
Well, he finished lower. He finished a lot slower than his teammate compared to Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz finished 7 seconds slower than Charles with a 5-second penalty, while George Russell finished 18 seconds slower than Lewis Hamilton. He also was in 8th, while Carlos Sainz was 5th with a penalty. And with a penalty, he still finished quite high. Carlos Sainz with no damage. I don't think that's really a flop.
Well, you do have to say, I mean, he is in a much better car.
Yeah, but then
and
let's
also
have
he
upgrades.
did cause the...
Mercedes have upgrades.
That's true, but the upgrades typically didn't really work.
But
I'm happy with either. I think they both were flops.
No, don't sit on the fence.
No, I honestly think both were flops.
There can only be one flop of the weekend.
Seeing as Rudy, I think, is the other one.
The neutral one.
Yeah,
I think I had a better case.
You know what? To be fair, I think you've won me over a little bit better than I won you over. So I think should we give it to George Russell? I'll do a bit of a U-turn.
I don't mind.
This is
I mind.
Amy mind. We'll give it to George Russell. Why not? We'll give it to Russell because, 19, 18 seconds behind his teammate after a sort of pretty late safety car as well. Inexcusable.
I think being behind an RB is quite damning.
Yeah.
Whereas obviously Sainz, he wasn't great, but yeah.
Back to a bit of praise now. Time to award the best team. I mean, this is another one where we all... did we all pick up a point for it? I mean, we all said McLaren, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would be unfair to not give us any points, although it doesn't really make a difference if we get a point or not. But we all said McLaren, of course, providing Lando Norris with his first race win. Piastri had solid pace. I mean, there were sort of pros and cons of the weekend. They weren't the worst team by any stretch. And, I mean, was anyone better, really? I'm trying to think. Possibly RB in terms of how it was, Ricciardo in the sprint race, Tsunoda in the Grand Prix. Maybe RB have a point to make there in terms of, throughout the weekend there was more success there.
I think Ferrari were a surprise for me a little bit. I mean, they still stayed up there with the getting on the podium. Charles both races were fighting for pole position with a McLaren with upgrades and Red Bull being obviously Red Bull. So it'd be interesting to see what upgrades they bring to Imola next time, I think, because maybe they, could get a race win again here. I think it's not just going to be all Max Verstappen from now on. I really don't. I think McLaren and Ferrari could bring a fight now.
Yeah, I mean, another one maybe as well. Alpine, their first points of the season could have been, obviously Seb is sort of grimacing a bit there. Should have been the other way
best
around.
Team over McLaren, but
no, I know. I'm playing devil's advocate a bit there, but no, I think that we all get a point for McLaren as we predicted it. We all made the same prediction basically, and pretty pleased with that. And then finally our shock prediction. Shocking that no one got it correct. I said Haas double points. Didn't happen. Maybe could have happened in the sprint if Hülkenberg kept Magnussen in the DRS, although they would have been very susceptible to being overtaken by quicker cars behind them. Amy, you said a Daniel Ricciardo DNF. I mean, he might as well have done in the race. There's literally nothing to say about it. And then Seb, you said Gasly Q3. So there's literally nothing to say about that either. So no shock predictions there. But at the end of the Miami Grand Prix weekend, I finished with 27 points from starting it with 23. Amy, you've had another blinder of a weekend. You've increased from 29 up to 35 points. Someone has finally broken the 30-point duct. And Seb, 5 points for you this weekend, boosting your total to 21. I mean, you're closing the gap. It's things are on the up. You're doing a bit of an Alpine here, not quite to the extent that maybe they want to, but progress is being made. But that just about does it for Miami review. And if you did enjoy, do make sure to click subscribe or like or follow us, depending on what platform you are tuning into. Make sure to keep your eyes peeled for some content coming out from now until the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix in Imola. Of course, that is in just under 2 weeks' time, but there will be some content to fill in, in that sort of space. And thanks to Seb and Amy for joining me once again. And we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.